Fuck's sake. This is just right. Take two, and let's see how long this lasts before I dismantle my Wi-Fi and go nuts. It's probably not going to last, but we'll give it a go. So yeah, Merry Christmas. I hope everyone obviously had a very, very Merry Christmas, and will hopefully have a healthy and happy New Year. Obviously, there's a big load of viruses going around. I know I've got one, so I've been ill for the most of the last week and a half. Horrible. A lot of the lads and ladies I work with haven't been well either. So there's that as well. Obviously, we've had a return to the Premier League after a lengthy absence because of the World Cup, and of course, while the Premier League clubs and the Football League clubs have also voted on a future winter break, obviously COVID interrupted those initial plans when they were going to be brought in over the last couple of years. This was a very enforced winter break, so we'll see how that all plays out and how that impacts future seasons with how disrupted this season has been. Obviously, the second round of the World Cup, the FA Cup, sorry, was played without much fanfare. I don't feel because of the World, and so it's lagging again. It's going to annoy me. So we'll see how that all plays out with the FA Cup, how the third round plays out, fixture congestion, and squads adapting to players returning from injury or having players injured at the World Cup. Many sporting events next year. I think it is going to be interesting next year with all the sporting events. There's two major sporting events that I think need to be looked at, and one of them is the Women's Football World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, which is already having an impact on Australian sport because of stadium issues in regards to going to be having some stadium availability issues that should have been thought of and thought ahead, dealt with the planning phase a lot earlier. So the NRL have definitely been most affected by that, and the tournament doesn't start for 6 months. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out and impacts the NRL season, because it's expansion season in the NRL with the Redcliffe Dolphins joining the competition, and of course John Bateman being the latest big name signing for the West Tigers, going down under for the second attempt. So that'll be interesting to see how that all plays out, considering how he left the Canberra Raiders last time season and a bit ago, and how that all ended and the fallout from that. So we'll see how that all plays out, considering that the NRL has now had a 25% salary cap increase, and the women's game has now got more money as well, and an expanded league for this coming season. So there's a lot of changes in rugby league in Australia. There's still a lot of criticism over a lot of the rule changes that have been brought in recent years, and the impact on the game. And it's bloody cold as doing Martin. And how those rule changes and how their implementation has been brought in over recent seasons, and the impact that's had on the game over the last 3 years. Now, obviously, this time 3 years ago, for those longer time viewers, obviously I was in my old flat and I was similarly ill at this time of year. How much has happened in the last 3 years? It's been an insane period from the end of 2019 to the end of 2022. Something that will live long in the memory. Other things, obviously, what to look forward to is the Rugby Union World Cup in 2023 as well, which is taking place in France. And with what's happened in Paris in recent days, with the unrest and the disturbances we've seen, that will have a bearing on the Olympics as well. And you've got those social aspects to it. There's an outpouring of anger on Parisian streets that I think has the ability to spread to other areas of France. It always does. And what we saw at the Champions League final as well, and their handling of the situation there, and how heavily criticised they ended up being, and the actual official reports actually exonerated the fans and put a lot of the blame actually on the domestic security and UEFA people governing and running the event. The rugby union World Cup. There's been a lot of emphasis, especially on the Parc des Princes, and there's the Stade de France in Paris. So that's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward. I mean, there's some more experimental rule changes they brought in with shot clocks because they're copying rugby league because rugby union is clearly lagging behind in the pace of the game. Um, and so there's been some more rule variations brought in just in time for the Rugby Union World Cup. Fantastic. They do this all the time. They keep coming up with these rule variations quite regularly. And whether that's the right way to deal with some of the problems rugby union is facing as a sport, by what copying another sport is not necessarily the best way to go, in my opinion. But that again is personal perception of that situation. But they are bringing rule variations now. It will be interesting to see how they all play out with the shot clock, scrums, and kicks, and conversions and such. I'm interested in how National Union are making improvements to paying the women's national team players in major sports, paying for them to travel. Yeah, that women's pay in professional sport has definitely been a massive talking point. Obviously, the NRL and I think the AFL with their women's leagues are leading the way with increasing the salaries that their players are getting paid. That is a very noticeable thing, especially in the NRL with their increased salary cap. It's very noticeable. Of up to 25%. I believe the increase is even bigger for the women's. Pay equalisations being brought up, paying players, that's fine, and paying expenses and their insurance, but they've also got to be making revenue on a club level. But it is a hot topic of debate and point. It led to player unrest in the Canada national setup going into the Football World Cup with how their women's team, which is actually very, very successful in the women's game, and payments and equal payments and deferrals and things like that, and sponsorships and development funds. I think rugby league in Australia is leading the way with the AFL. I think they're the trend setters right now with pay packages they've put in place. Whether that's the best way to go about it, but there's definitely massive growth in the women's game in Aussie rules and rugby league in Australia, and I think the way they're going about structuring it and they are bringing in money. It's not as if these leagues aren't making money; they are actually making a small profit, so they are profitable. In regards to women's football, that debate is becoming quite toxic. I think quite unfairly so. I think there's a long way to go to bridge the gap, and maybe they never fully are on par with the men's game when it comes to profitability and profit making and having the same revenue streams. But I think, but it's a fair question. We've had this debate in tennis. We've had this debate in a few other sports as well. Motorsports had the debate. With the women's W formula, which has been heavily criticised by some female drivers and team owners and mechanics and sponsors and stuff. When we see women enter the men's field, they do pretty well. I think some of the smaller nations with smaller budgets or smaller leagues with smaller budgets or more niche sports, it's a bit more difficult to split the revenues and pay equally. I think that distorts things a little bit. There's got to be funding models for grassroots being put in place, because one of the best ways to grow a sport is through participation, and be that through fans or playing, and increase the participation of fans turning up, or a female, or more families turning up. So it's not just actively playing in the sport, it's also participating in administration levels, coaching, fandom, a whole host of levels. Yeah, the MLS is interesting because obviously their season follows a different format to the European leagues. Their season runs pretty much parallel to the baseball season, uh, and it, it, the MLS and sport in general is rapidly growing in the US. We know that, but the MLS is an interesting one because it's not growing as quickly as the sport that it represents. More American fans will watch the European leagues than actually watch the MLS. It's still as a league, while participation of the sport of football is higher than ice hockey now, and rapidly closing in on baseball. The league itself is still well behind in revenues from the Big Four, and I think that will continue to be the case. Major League Baseball, I don't know how it can sustain the amount of money, the profit making or whatever. I've had this argument with North American fans. I don't know how they can continue that. I've read that in Canada, the women's rugby team have tried to demand more money. The money simply isn't there. Yeah, look, um, this is the problem with a lot of sports where the majority of revenues are made by the men's version of the game. And in some countries where it is more of a niche sport. I mean, even with ice hockey in Canada, the professional game and the women's side of things is struggling. And even before COVID, it was an issue that has been well discussed by a lot of people in the sports media, and a lot of sports economic experts have looked at it. That situation isn't going to change anytime soon. And women's side of the game with the Canadian team, they are a very, very good side. They're one of the top 5 sides in the world. They're very consistent. They're a very good structured setup, which is fantastic. They're good fun to watch as well. The problem is the money for the sport just isn't there. So unless the Canadians, alongside the US, maybe can co-host a World Cup, I know the US will be hosting World Cup. It would have been better for them to be co-hosts personally, to bring that revenue in. It doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense demanding money that you don't have, really. Yeah, look, in regards to the US soccer or football, as we call it over here in Europe, that's been a very heated debate over there as well. Yes, their women's national side is one of the most successful national teams in any sport, in any discipline of all time. In fact, the problem is, while it's a very participated sport across all stratas of society, both men, women, families, fans, and players, and it's a fast-growing sport with more administrators and coaches. Women's employment as well been heavily linked to the sport. The women's game in North America, they've gone professional several times with professional leagues, and it's failed because the structure is wrong. Not because the willingness isn't there. They structure it all wrong. And they're demanding money that the sport can ill afford to misspend, I think is the realistic term. While it's fair to reward them for their services, and obviously pay the insurance, travel costs, and make sure that they are well compensated on international duty, they've got to look at the domestic game at club level and why it keeps failing. Because that's where players make their bread and butter, really. That's where, your salaries get paid. That's where the money really gets made, is by club teams, not by your international setup. And that's where the women's Canadian rugby and the women's football in the US is going to fail, because they can't get a profitable club game going. There you go. I've just solved. I haven't solved the problem, but I've answered where the problem lies, and it's not with, because globally, team sports are profit is made at the club domestic level. That's where the money's made. And until they can get a profitable, functioning league that can be self-sustaining going, or in a league in partnership with the MLS going. That's going to be an ongoing issue where they keep demanding money that the governing body cannot pay them. Don't get me wrong, yes, they are a very successful team, but financial stability and financial growth comes from the club game, and they're failing to recognise this. And a lot of their problems that they've had has been in relation to the club game collapsing all the time, and just not being financially stable is a good way to look at it. Not being financially stable, and that is a problem that they are not solving. But yeah, there's no doubt that the women's national side in the US system is the most successful national side ever, in my opinion. Yeah, hopefully Mike's another team in California, because that's a hotbed of professional sport in the US. California, Texas, and New York State are the state, and Florida is the heartbeat of the US economy financially, really. And they're the four most populous states. That's where all the money is. And Sacramento is a very good climatic location as well. People forget how temperate the climate is in Sacramento because of the valley and the way the mountains form the valley and all that. Geographically, actually, climate's very like Mediterranean climate, so it's very good playing conditions for a variety of sports. Well, rugby union's quite popular on the West Coast, in the western states. Obviously, football, soccer is quite good as well. It would be nice to see another strong team in California. There's probably enough people in California playing the game at a professional, semi-professional level to actually have an own Californian league, which would be fantastic. It really would. And hopefully, yes, there's definitely the growth there. I think, look, studies have proven, and they've done studies, that the sport itself is more participated in than more established sports in the US, such as ice hockey has now been overtaken as a participation sport nationwide. That's not at the top professional level, but it's getting there. I think the MLS needs another big player that US fans recognise and legitimise the league again, like Beckham did. That is true. I think without David Beckham, the MLS may not still be going. I think David Beckham is a catalyst for the league, and is that turning point. It's like Gretzky going to the LA Kings in '88. That was a catalyst for growth of the NHL, for example, south of the Canadian border, especially in the non-traditional markets. Even though LA had been a team since the '60s, the Gretzky, putting a superstar like Wayne Gretzky, for example, in the LA Kings in '98 was a catalyst for growing the sport in the southern half of the United States. I think, and you could argue with the proposed new spending rules and financial rules that UEFA are going to be implementing on European clubs. The format changes to the Champions League. You may see some very frustrated players and some agents agitating for moves. And of course, with an upcoming World Cup in 2026, the MLS, both in Canada and the US, there's going to be clubs going, oh, okay, we're going to be getting a windfall from this World Cup. There's going to be renewed interest in the league. More fans are going to buy in. They're going to be very, very tempted to look at their salary cap, because I think the MLS will be getting some money out of this upcoming World Cup in a few years' time. And much like the '94 World Cup triggered the establishment of the league as it is, the next World Cup could see an explosion of growth of fandom and the league revenues. So yeah, you need to get. Don't get me wrong. There have been other big name players since David Beckham to go to the MLS. It's just how David Beckham and his PR team and his agent and the media that followed him around portrayed him, sold him as an image. So you've had your Ibrahimoviches, you've had your Pirlos, you've had your Kakars, you've had Steven Gerrard played over there, Robbie Keane played over there, Jermaine Defoe. I mean, they're not as big a names, but Pirlo definitely, I think, is equal, if not best, than Beckham. He's won more in the game. Kaká, fantastic player. Um, when you have these players following David Ibrahimovic, for example, it definitely helps, kick growth on a little bit. But I can see some big name European players or players based in Europe at some point in the next couple of years, with the pending spending rules changing. If they do get fully approved, clubs are going to have to limit possibly some of their salaries, offload some contracts. There are going to be some players going, I want to get paid. And whether the MLS has enough operating revenue to really absorb some of the salaries that are going to be players are going to be asking. We'll see what happens, but it's going to be interesting. Yeah, it's obviously good to see North American developed talent coming over to Europe and doing well. We've seen it for the best part of 2-3 decades now, that North American talent has been coming over to Europe. Jose Reyna was obviously the first big name. We've seen Brian McBride, Dempsey, Brad Fiedel, Casey Keller, goalkeepers are some great notes. So we've been seeing North American players coming to Europe, predominantly England and Germany, for their club football. But they've been coming over for quite some time. I mean, Paul Pesca-Solido, Canadian international of years gone by, obviously played most of his career in the lower leagues in the English game, but they've been playing here for quite some time. And a lot of them have gone under the radar, so that's not a new thing. Don't get Dele Alli. Dele Alli is his career has really fallen off a cliff in the last couple of years. He's currently playing for Besiktas. I don't know for how much longer because he was booed off in his last game. And the team were 2-0 down. They take him off. The team win 4-2. It was we're not playing well. He's not playing well. And Dele Alli we could look at the career of Dele Alli and how it's really fallen off a cliff face. He was showing a lot of promise as a youngster at MK Dons, a club that everyone loves to hate here in England, especially if you're an AFC Wimbledon fan. Like, we'll get around to doing those videos. They're a lot of fun to do. But that is possibly MK Dons the most hated club in England. And at Milton Keynes, he was coming through as a bright youngster. Spurs come in when he's still quite young. He gets first team regular football quite early on. And of course, in the 2016 season, obviously, Tottenham fall short in the Premier League title race. They end up finishing third after being joint leaders with Leicester, going head to head and swapping places, and they fell off a cliff a little bit. So he really came to the fore in 2016 and 2018. That was his little period. Obviously, the World Cup in 2018, and that period he was quite an integral cog in the wheel for both Spurs and England. And then it's just not panned out. And there's been a lot of criticisms of his attitude at times, his attitude in training on the field. And it hasn't really worked out for him. The COVID period, I don't think helped. With how that disrupted a lot of people's lives. And obviously, he's ended up playing in Turkey for what it's worth. And it's not going well over there either. And Turkish football fans don't hold back when they give you, their feelings. They make their feelings known. He's not settled in Turkey. It's not going well. And he looks very lost. He doesn't look motivated. And there were questions about his attitude early on in the Spurs days as well. Has he been correctly managed? Have there been positive discussions between his coaches? And how much influence does his agent have? And is he paid to all these things? He definitely he definitely looks like he's at a crossroads in his career. Is he fully fit? Is he fully motivated? His training regime. Um, yeah, and yeah, his attitude has been questioned. There's rumours of him being a bit of a playboy. Yes, that's not unknown, and yes, there are rumours of. There's also Fortnite gaming tales, but he's not the only high-profile athlete whose career has been parallel with their gaming. That new young generation. We've seen it in the NHL with some players. We've seen it in rugby league. We've seen it in rugby union. We've seen it in the NFL. We've seen it in the NBA. We've seen it in with motorsport, especially during the lockdowns. A lot of players, yes, have the first lockdown is where all sports stopped, and they came up with these protocols. So return to play. A lot of coaches were highly critical of the Fortnite, the Fortnite generation, as they were called, and their attitudes. And when they said, "Look, can we just let's put a cap on this. Let's not ban them from having some relaxation time, but let's try and limit." It was like trying to deal with kids, and these are adults. Um, so there were question marks on was he keeping fit during that initial lockdown in 2020? Was keeping up with his training regime whilst he was isolating, and then when the rules the return of play. Um, so yeah, but he's not the only player whose attitude to training, fitness, diet, attitude to life, um, you know, have been questioned. There are some of his contemporaries who are of a similar age who have a much better attitude to a whole load of things, not just including their professional sport, but what they do off the field as well. Yes, they're going to have their relaxation time in the off season or when they are injured and they are recovering and they're told, okay, you've got to rest for a bit. But they will video game or do some live streaming like on YouTube or Twitch or something and actually interact with their fan base, which is fine, and have a good relationship with the community, like volunteer work and get involved with community projects. And there's what Dele Alli's doing, which is excess. He thinks he's better than he actually is. And yes, his attitude isn't the best, and there's a lot of distractions around him that I think are impacting his on-field performance, which is what he's paid to do. But he's not the only player to go through this. He won't be the last. Those distractions and those pitfalls are still there. It's who you surround yourself with, and that support network you have. Um, and this has been debated a lot in the media in recent weeks, with some of these young players getting off with big money moves, big money contracts, very early on in their professional careers, and then you know, does it pan out? Does it not? And so there is that. But also his position. What is his best position? Is he a defensive midfielder? Is he attacking midfielder? And all those things. I think yes. One thing that I definitely think, and I have watched documentaries about this and looked into this. The lower level and non-league clubs are struggling in a variety of sport, not just in England, but more widely. Grassroots level sports been struggling, and COVID's had an impact on that. And now people are looking at what they can spend, and I think we could. I'm surprised more clubs haven't gone out of business. This debate's been had about the financial state of a lot of sports at the lower levels, and while it's good to see good crowd numbers at some of these non-league and lower league games and grassroots level, which is good, that loss of income for most of the last 3 years, really, or reduced income over the last 3 years, has definitely had a massive impact um, on grassroots sport. Um, yes, Hertfordshire in England only has the three professional clubs um, of a decent enough standard, and none of them are in the top flight right now to support in football. That is true, um, and so there is a limit. What fans can support. So they're already more likely to support their local club than in other areas of the country because there's not a lot of top quality depth, so to speak. So lower level teams will probably get bigger crowds than in other parts of the country. That's some of the little oddities about domestic game in this country. Is certain areas like Lincolnshire, for example, and Norfolk and Suffolk do not have a lot of professional clubs, so the local non-league club might get a bigger crowd than somewhere else in the country because there is that lack of professionalism. That's an interesting little quirk that we have in our system. Even in other sports, Saracens, Mavericks, netball, and Hemel Straw basketball. Again, I think it's because of the limited amount of population. So there's obviously a lot of disposable income in Hertfordshire. In its proximity to London and the Midlands, there's a lot of high-paying jobs in the M1, M11 corridor and north of the Watford Gap. With good transport links to the Midlands and the North and London and the South East. There's a lot of high-paying jobs. There's a lot of high-income jobs. And yeah, that explains why certain aspects, but with that lack of high-level professional sport taking place, when you've got a lot of sports fans in a location with disposable income, it's a very interesting dynamic that plays out there. How important are the FA Cup matches against for the smaller sides? They're massive. They're massive paydays for non-league and lower league clubs when they draw a bigger club, especially at home. That could solve their budgets for a season or two. That could for a non-league club, for example, if they get to the latter stages of the FA Cup, let's say the fourth or fifth round, and they draw a club like Liverpool, Everton, or Man United, or Man City, or whoever from the Premier League, that revenue from that match alone, including all the previous rounds, could pay their budgets for a couple of years. They could make enough revenue from an FA Cup run, which could pay their players for a couple of years, pay their bills, make a profit for a year or two, which could then obviously help them in their own domestic league campaign, trying to get that promotion or trying to stabilise in the league. That money could be put forward to some renovations to the stadium or training ground. It has a massive impact to the lower league sides. It's a good moneymaker. It always has been. It's been called a payday. You'll hear a term in the media if you watch a British broadcast saying it's a big payday for insert little club here against big club. And so it does have a massive impact. Massive impact on the financial fortunes of lower league and non-league clubs. Considering that when Bury went out of business, the Accrington Stanley board, the chairman, came out and said the loss of those two league matches alone, not including the cup games that they could have hypothetically played in the FA League Trophy, the League Cup, and the FA Cup, hypothetically, if they were drawn against each other. But the loss of Bury and just two games a season cost the club £250,000 in revenue of the 2018-2019 season. So, and that's just in the league. So you can imagine what a one-off cup game against higher ranked opposition could do. And this is where the argument about against scrapping the replays comes in. Because let's say a smaller club, let's say it's Accrington Stanley, and they've got a big draw against Man City or Liverpool, for example, who are actually local rivals historically, and they are an older club than those two clubs are historically with the original foundation anyway. But they draw them at home, they get a draw. Let's say it's a 1-1. Accrington's home ground is quite small, it's quite intense, the pitch is not the best quality. They get a big draw at Anfield to the replay back in the day. Big money. So that's an argument against scrapping the replays. But they'll have their own fixtures in the league to contend with, and they'll be focusing on trying to stabilise, get promotion, that kind of thing. But it's big payday. When like a club size of Bury going out of business costs another club in the same league £250,000, you can imagine what an FA Cup tie could do. Because tickets will sell out very quickly, merchandise, concessions, you name it, will be unlimited supply. if the game gets televised, they get the TV revenue as well. Yeah, it definitely is very, very important. I wouldn't say for growth, but for the finances of the club. Yes, I remember Spurs at Marine. I watched it live. I did a review of it live, which is on the channel. I think it was Gareth Bale coming back on his loan spell. That was very, very important because Marine is a non-league club in Merseyside. It's one of the clubs up in Merseyside in the Liverpool area of the country, and that was very important for that club's finances. Tottenham not so much, but for that club, very important, very important. And yeah, I remember watching the game and you know at that time with what was going on with the lockdowns and the situation that COVID, this time 2 years ago, had stuck upon us and into last beginning of last year. It's amazing how far we've come. I mean, I've had both my initial jabs, didn't get my booster, didn't get the booster in the end. I think I've done all right when it comes to viruses and colds. I was ill in May for a couple of days. I wasn't very well, and I've been ill over Christmas. A lot of my friends have come down with COVID though, which is really interesting. In my opinion, very interesting. We haven't had a lot of news on COVID infection rates and hospitalizations, and obviously the death tolls plummeted, so it's not as serious as it was before. But a lot of my friends have tested positive for the COVID, so that's interesting. But I think I've had scarlet fever, to be honest. Gonna watch your review on that. They sold over 25 virtual tickets for their game. Um, they weren't the only club to sell the virtual tickets where you could, stream it online, and there were things done during the last couple of years to help with revenues when people were furloughed and fans were not able to go to stadiums in the numbers that obviously we are used to. When capacities were restricted or reduced or no capacity at all, playing in front of empty stadiums, a lot of teams were allowed, broadcasters allow these live streams and things to take place. They tweak the broadcast rules because there was a lot of money. They put games that would normally be on subscription on free-to-air coverage, and they were the highest viewed Premier League games of all time. And there's a further call to put a proportion of Premier League games on free-to-air coverage every year. So it definitely caused a shift in how sport is consumed. Is a good way to look at it. How we consume our professional sport on TV and on the media and online and on streaming services, and it's the traditional TV deal coming to an end. Are we going to have to see a multifaceted media deal going forward, and how much money does that become worth? Have we reached a peak, a plateau in the value of media rights deals for domestic and overseas audiences? Are we also seeing a trend with the streaming services where, because of people cutting back on spending, we're going to see a reduction in people buying streaming services? So there's a lot to look at there. And then I watched a documentary the other week when I was on my birthday week off, beginning of the month, in regards to the non-league and how they distributed their government and emergency funding over the last couple of years, and how that was distributed, and how um, there was an unequal distribution and there wasn't a lot of transparency, and how it's actually impacted the game at the lower levels, and how some clubs are basically running bust. And question marks over the governance of the game, the transparency of governance, which is a recurring theme at all levels of sport, it seems, with sports governance and the transparency side of things. And it was very striking how clubs were impacted. by the pandemic and having no fans or limited fans in attendance, and how some clubs were driven to the brink and other clubs weren't. How do you view the development of the English non-league pyramid over the past few years? It looks very strong from here. As I say, harking back to the National League documentary I watched a couple of weeks ago, I have concerns actually. Don't get me wrong, there's some big clubs down in the non-league. There's some big clubs who are ex-football league clubs, so that does increase fan numbers of games when you've got clubs with big traditional fan bases playing in the non-league. Well, the National League, then the National League North and South, and then the divisions below that. I think it's a good step in the right direction. It's to do with the finances during COVID of the National League and National League North and South, and how they were the rescue fund package was distributed, and grants and loans that they were given, and concerns. I mean, no clubs went out of business, but there are concerns about how that was distributed, how it was spread out amongst the clubs. It wasn't all equally distributed. The formula they used was flawed. All sorts. Well, why do I think there isn't a standout league in rugby? I'm assuming we're talking about Union. Salary cap issues. The French league can obviously pay more than any other league at the moment. The English league salary caps and their clubs have gone out of business or have been mothballed, like with Worcester and Wasps. Massive financial problems. God, this cold is not going away. I don't know. Is the solid answer to that? You could argue the way professionalism has been structured since 1995 has caused a lot of the problems. You could argue a whole host of reasons. But why there isn't one single standout, how the domestic game is marketed in all the domestic competitions. The collapse of Super Rugby, the rebranding of the Pro League, which was formerly the Celtic League, into the United Rugby Championship. Question marks over the inclusion of the South African sides in the European game. Rugby Union's club game is in trouble, and I don't think Rugby Union likes to admit that their club game is not in rude health. And I've had this debate online, and someone said I was stupid and the club game goes from strength to strength. I mean, if that's the case, why are two of the biggest clubs in this country out of business? Why is the Welsh game financially on its knees? Why are the salary caps completely unbalanced? And the collapse of Super Rugby, Rugby Union's doing so well. But there's definitely issues with how professionalism has been implemented over the years, and how the finances in the game are distributed, which were highlighted before COVID. COVID has sped up the process of carnage, really. And Wasps' money issues go back years. This is not a new thing for Wasps. There was a situation, I think COVID finally exposed their limited revenues, but Wasps' money issues will go back years. There's not a lot of fan-owned clubs, I don't think, in the professional game anyway, in English football. Non-league is probably more, but the more professional side of things, I think Exeter is the standout one. There's not many fan-owned clubs in existence. The French league is definitely the one with the most money, the highest salary cap by a margin. Whether it's the most competitive is another thing, but even their model is not sustainable. But the reason why I think the French league is more successful is the French domestic football league doesn't have a domestic TV deal, and is not as competitive. So there's a difference, because the English Premier League is so dominant when it comes to media rights, sponsorship, money, interests, both domestically and overseas. You could argue that's had a negative impact on rugby union and rugby league as well. Whereas in France, there's no one dominant league for viewership. There's no one dominant league for fan base. For a point, rugby's a bit more regional, but You argue that. Why do fans expect owners to invest so much in clubs when most of them operate at a loss in profit? The business model is a complete mess. That is an argument in case for a salary cap in whatever sport you're discussing, where operating at a loss or a spending cap. And then when we discuss football terms, the whole structure is broken and has been for a long time. This is not a new debate. This is a very long-standing issue that we have within the game. There's definitely massive structural problems. Spending is out of control. COVID hasn't slowed it down, apparently. When these clubs 2 years ago going, oh, we're going to be bankrupt. Suddenly they're still blowing transfer records and stupid transfer fees and wages. Whereas not long before they're going, we can't pay our players, we can't pay our staff. So the model that they have in place is broken, governance is broken, and ultimately you end up with the situation you have. AFC Wimbledon was refounded by its fans, so I forgot about that. But Exeter City is the model club. Forget what level they play at, they are the model club for ownership. They live within their means, they make a small profit, and with that small profit, they've invested in the playing squad, and they've invested in the stadium refurbishment. And then well, they play at a lower level, doesn't matter. They were badly run by a bad owner, fans stepped in. And imagine if Premier League clubs with their global fan bases sold that ownership model to fan bases around the world. Very quickly come up with the money to run them. You wouldn't need these so-called billionaire and trillionaire owners, really. The whole structure of the game is rotten, in my opinion, and has been for a long time. There's some very unscrupulous owners within the professional game. There's some very bad owners, and there are some very incompetent owners. There are also some very good owners as well. We should not forget them. But unfortunately, the whole thing is tainted by those owners who run their clubs badly or don't run them as well as they should. And I think that has to be taken into consideration. And definitely discussed. So there is that. But whether we get the required changes with Milton Keynes is a city north of London, and the original AFC Wimbledon, their owner moved the team to Milton Keynes because there were declining attendances and there were stadium issues because they were ground sharing at Selhurst Park, Crystal Palace, and that angered a lot of fans. They wanted investment in their old Plough Lane, which had been neglected for many years, and so what ultimately happened was the original AFC Wimbledon ended up being moved to Milton Keynes. The rebranding was hideous, and everyone can agree it's hideous. And the traditional fans of AFC Wimbledon went, right, we'll reform our club, and we will own our club. And for a long time, they played at Kingston upon Thames, and ground shared with them for many, many years. And they recently moved back into a refurbished Plough Lane after 20, 25 years since they last played there or something. And they're now in the league above MK Dons. MK Dons were a championship club at one point, and they're not doing so well. AFC Wimbledon have slowly gone up the league ladder from formation. I think they had to be in the 7th tier or something. They've slowly worked their way up the non-league and now professional league pyramids, whereas MK Dons have gone the other way. And it it was an American style move which didn't work with a European um, club community dynamic, and it has backfired, and they are one of the most hated clubs because the move was allowed to go ahead. The EFL got heavily criticised. They were not long before a Premier League club, so the parachute payments, I don't know if they were still being applied or not at the time, but it definitely led to an angry fan base, which very quickly turned against the owner. The owner was like, at one point, only like 800 fans were turning up to the game, which meant it wasn't cost effective to ground share with Crystal Palace, who were expecting money. They weren't making the gate receipts to pay Crystal Palace ground share money. And the owner was like, the fans don't care about the club, I'm going to move it. When in reality, they did care about the club. They were boycotting the club, and it backfired on the owner of now Milton Keynes, MK, because fans stayed away. They had to build a new fan base from scratch, and they've never been successful in the league then, haven't. It's not as much as a disaster, no, that is true. They have developed some really good players. They've been very, very good in the transfer market, selling said players like Dele Alli. And it, it it did sort of pay off in the end, but it hasn't paid off on the field. And their fan base now is much smaller than AFC Wimbledon's fan base, and they haven't had the same connection with community. I don't think. But they're not well liked within the English game. It's a very divisive topic. I'm not even an AFC Wimbledon fan, but the way it was handled at the time, about 18, 19 years ago, and still to this day, um, basically football clubs alongside any sporting team is a community asset, um, and the community basically voted with their feet, saying we're not tolerating bad ownership, we're not tolerating mismanagement, we're not tolerating ignorance. And the owner, thinking that fans weren't turning up because it wasn't working in that location, well, of course it wasn't going to work when you're ground sharing with one of the biggest rivals, which Crystal Palace didn't want themselves, and Wimbledon fans didn't want. The police didn't want it, but it was forced upon them. But basically, the old AFC Wimbledon was badly run for about the last 10 years of its existence as AFC Wimbledon, and the new AFC Wimbledon is well run and has reconnected with that Southwest London fan base, and they got their stadium rebuilt. It took a long time, a lot of battles with planning applications and getting financing together, and building work behind it. But they got there in the end. But MK Dons, that's where the American style sports ownership doesn't work and backfires. And that's what a lot of fans fear with a lot of these North American owners, especially American owners, buying football clubs in this country, is they're going to do the same thing when, let's say, there's a run of bad form, or fans are boycotting for whatever reason as a protest. That fans fear that they're just going to Americanize everything, and it doesn't work because of the community link. My Christmas, I've been ill from the majority of my Christmas week. I come back from holiday. Obviously, the first day back I got back from holiday was snowing, so we had that cold spell, which also was occurring whilst I had my week off anyway. And then last week, obviously, we had all that heavy rain and damp, and I got ill, and I've had a chest infection. Yeah, so there's that. Yeah, the MK Dons. Look, the whole Americanization and the relocation of the team, what 80 odd miles or whatever it was, obviously didn't work then, and it's still not really resonating with the people of Milton Keynes, because that's Formula One country, it's motorsport country, it's ice hockey country because they've got a very big ice hockey structure there with youth teams and professional teams that have played. So it hasn't really worked. Ironically, I don't know what average crowd numbers compared to the capacity of the stadium is, but it doesn't seem to have had the impact that the ownership. I don't know if it's still the same ownership that was when the team moved in the early 2000s, but I don't think it's had the same impact that was expected. And the team hasn't reached the Premier League as intended, so got back to the Premier League as intended. So a rebrand may be in order. But it's not as if they can go back to Wimbledon because there's a AFC Wimbledon that's back in Plough Lane, and there's definitely that division. And when Milton Keynes play games against rival clubs, they're not welcomed as by the hosts. They're not well they're not well treated when they travel around the country. There's a lot of protests against them. The stain on the English game, and I think it's one of the banners that I've seen recently on social media. You could make an argument that the MK Wimbledon wasn't the first franchise team. But Arsenal stayed in London though, and they had no choice but to find new premises, and that's in the early days of the establishment of the early days of the game. And whereas Arsenal as a football club hadn't been a football club for very, very long, and they were still staying within London. They just crossed the Thames. They had money problems. But Newton Heath, Man United, Newton Heath is not near Old Trafford, and they changed name as a result to represent that change. Moving from Woolwich to Islington is not as similar to moving from Newton Heath to Trafford for Manchester United. Liverpool originally were the original owners of Anfield. That was Everton, and they moved across Stanley Park. But the same principle applies to a lot of clubs who've moved in a geographical area, but they're still part of a similar community. How would their history be different? Definitely, the direction of the club would have been different because of the income of that part of London was more working class, whereas Islington a bit more mix. Limitations on their stadium because their stadium actually burned down due to a terrorist attack from the suffragettes. It's difficult to pan out because they would have had to compete alongside West Ham and Charlton and Leyton Orient in that area of southeast London for fan base. Although Leyton Orient's north of the river, but the south, that part of London is verging on Kent, and so we don't know how it would have affected. It's a hypothetical. Charlton were a very good side in the 30s as well as Arsenal, so they would have had a very good right. But their rivalry wouldn't be with Tottenham, it would be Charlton, which would be very interesting because Charlton were a very good side in the 30s and haven't been very successful since then. So were Arsenal, so their rivalry would have been different. That's a massive hypothetical. You could argue what would have happened if Blackburn Olympic had survived into the Football League era. How different the course of football in the Northwest would have been, especially in a town the size of Blackburn, which is not massive, but it's not tiny. But how that would have changed it. There's a lot of things that are hypotheticals. Fulham does not have the oldest ground. That is that's Sheffield United with Bramall Lane. And I think Bramall Lane is the oldest continuously used sports stadium in the country. Craven Cottage is one of the oldest, yes, but it's not the oldest. On the oldest stand, I don't think it's the oldest stand either. I think there's some older stands floating around in some of the older football stadiums and rugby union, rugby league stadiums in the country. Woolwich Arsenal needed a ground nearer the northern bound. Sorry, went north. Yeah, basically they had no stadium, they had no money, but they had players willing to play, and they had an owner willing to get investment, which is what happened. And then within a few decades of moving in there, they were called Bank of England Club because they managed to get Herbert Chapman as manager and became the wealthiest club in England because of sudden investment. So yes, but that was more a necessity, an infrastructure necessity. Firstly, for getting fans to games because Greenwich is not easily accessible for the main line termini, for the railway stations in London, which are all right in the centre. You're right far out on the southeast side of the Thames. So geographically, it was very important, and yeah. Craven Cottage, don't go in the snow because the pitch freezes, especially the cottage corner will freeze solid. I was meant to go to a Fulham Blackburn game many years ago with a friend of mine who's a Fulham fan, and we were going to go to the game, and then we were on the way to the station. His dad phoned him up and said, "Don't bother going. Game's called off." We're like, "What?" And then we looked. Early days of smartphones. This is how long ago this was. And the cottage corner of Craven Cottage was frozen solid. They couldn't defrost the pitch. Failed pitch inspection twice. They gave an early inspection, so we'll re-inspect it, and it failed to meet requirements. So Craven Cottage in the snow is not a good idea because you'll probably have a game called off. Whether they've upgraded the undersoil heating, another thing, but it does struggle. Breaking news: Denver Broncos sacked first-year head coach Nathaniel Hackett. The Broncos are in a mess, much like a lot of teams. The US Blizzard, I've been following this as well because it's been coming a lot on as a bit of a train spotter. I do follow the rail cams when I'm trying to just nod off. I just put them on in the background, and you can see the impact, especially across the Midwest and the Northeast corridor. 60% of the country. I mean, the snow's reaching southern Texas and Georgia and Alabama, and parts of northern Florida. They've got weather warnings in place. It's killing people. So there you go. Like some of the lowest temperatures recorded in the 48 states south of the Canadian border ever. And I've been following that in recent days. As our weather's got really warm over the last week, their weather's got pretty cold. But when we had our cold spell, they were getting a lot of rain. So it's really odd how that dynamic with the weather works. Oh, this is my Bracknell Bees Christmas jersey from 2018. So this is like 4 years old. It comes out every Christmas. It's my ugly Christmas jersey. Ugly Christmas jerseys are the best. It's one of only 22 ever made. It was the one of two jerseys that would have been put on by players should there have been an injury and damaged jersey. It's blood jersey, as they call it. So it's one of only 22 ever sold. They were all match-worn jerseys, and this is one of the two that weren't worn in the game that were backup ones with no names on the back, with a number on the back in case a player got injured and bled on it. There you go. So only 22 in existence. I've got another one that's quite rare, one of only 22 in existence as well. So I've got a couple, but yeah, this is a rare one. I've had it 4 or 5 years now. There's actually been some electronic blackouts, some states from the cold. It's delayed several games, scary stuff. The states that I used to cold. Yeah, Texas. I know Texas has been badly affected. Huge parts of Canada and the US, about 1 million people without power or something. In Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio, and Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and the central provinces of Canada. It's been a what's going on? Why is my internet? It's all gone mad. Yeah, no, it's all a bit. The US and Canadian storm, how long that lasts, very similar to our cold spell. We're expecting our weather to get colder in not this coming week, towards the end of next week. Our weather's going to get colder again, apparently. So we're expecting a change in the weather. Now, whether that impacts the US and Canada, we shall see, but we're also expecting a weather change, which could bring more snow. No, the Bees are still going. They've still got a team. It's just we don't play in the same location. They just play in the next town up, or 2 towns up. The team still exists. They just don't play in their old arena, which is gone. They play in a new arena. So the team still exists. So don't worry, they're still going. I just haven't been to a game in 3 years. I was going to go to a game last weekend, but I ended up getting ill and couldn't go. But they play in a new arena, which they share with another team. They play in the league below. And they're still going as a team. They're still an ice hockey club. They just don't play in Bracknell anymore. There was a great debate about the arena owners doing what they did, and it's created a lot of division within the local community. That has raised a lot of eyebrows about some of the decisions taken at local government level, and the relationship between the arena owners and local political party of a name we should not mention, Conservative Party, and a relationship with local councillors and planning commission, and a whole range of things that go back a long time. The arena owners weren't very popular business people in the local community, and every community they've operated in, they've had a very, very, very bad relationship with the communities that they've had ice rinks and leisure centres in. And I think I'm fair in saying that. And there is a massive question mark about community facilities in private hands. I've been out in similar weather conditions in the Alps. It's not pleasant for more than a couple of minutes. You will die. It's not advisable to spend more than 5 minutes outside in it because you will die. It's not nice, especially when you add on wind chill and then the lack of visibility can lead to problems. And I was watching. I went and communicated with the US weather broadcaster in Michigan, and he was wearing snowboarding goggles because to protect himself from the glare from the snow. My current MP is John Redwood, yes. And we're talking about like 500 metres. If I'm 500 metres down the road, I have a different MP, which is hilarious. He's just as incompetent. So yes, John Redwood is my local member of parliament, and that is as political as I'm going to get. That's what I'm going to get. That's something for the other chat. Not a fan. The answer. Not a fan of the Vulcan. No, he's the Vulcan. Is the best way to describe John Redwood as the media described him during John Major's government when he was Minister of Wales, when he was put in charge of the Department of Wales, when he was Welsh Minister. Before devolution came in, and he was sent out as Welsh First Minister. That was quite funny. Didn't know the Welsh anthem. Yes, Spock, the Vulcan. Yes, very right wing by British standards. In American standards, he would be seen as a Democrat, which is weird, but very, very, very right wing by British standards. Yeah, again, when we come to the political discussion, I want to keep that to the channel, but it is very, very interesting that we end up politics gets brought in. We've seen it get brought in when it comes to decisions, when it comes to applying for World Cups, and Euros, and Commonwealth Games, and Olympics, and the bidding process, and how you you've got to get the political backing for it and government financing for it. So that's why the London Olympic Stadium or the London Stadium where West Ham play, and their agreement doesn't sit well with the current mayor of London. He wants to rewrite the contractual agreement, but he's not fully in charge of that. So it all gets complicated when we say we don't want politics in sport. In order to get stadiums built, funding secured for grassroots projects, you need it. I would prefer more. It's all well and good when the country has money to have more facilities in public hands, especially like things like ice rinks, community facilities like that, where you can also have a professional sports team playing there, but also have community access. Ice rinks are one of those facilities that you could definitely argue for community, local government ownership or government, absolutely, or some sort of shared ownership between a private firm and local government. Absolutely. Um, but where's the money going to come from to pay for it? Because the country doesn't have any money. And while that's a lovely dream to have, and I do agree with that sentiment, um, that's something that should have happened 12, 15 years ago. Would have protected a lot of these facilities against the situations we're seeing now. Or would it? I don't know. But definitely a shared ownership model is definitely something that could be put on the table. I wouldn't say go full socialist because that doesn't work, but a shared ownership model with local government and local business coming in and running of facilities definitely makes some sense to a point, but it's how that shared ownership model works. We've seen it not work in a lot of sporting facilities, community level and higher up, professional level as well. I mean, the Widnes Vikings in rugby league, their stadium was owned by the local council and they couldn't afford the rent. A couple back in 2017, 2018, they went into administration. So be careful what you wish for because it doesn't always pan out. I think the poor should have access to gym pools. There is an argument that we have sold off a lot of like playing fields, the sporting assets like community centres, basketball courts, government government coffers when there's been a shortage of tax revenue or a downturn in the economy. It has happened. It's been going on for 40 years. And people always blame the Conservative governments for that, but actually the selling off of playing fields goes back to the Labour government of the 70s because the Labour government had no money. And it was a short-term financial gain for long-term loss. They were like, well, we need money now. What assets can we sell off that can get us income now so we can get through the next couple of financial years and then we will reassess, possibly purchase them back at a reduced fee or whatever. Didn't work out that way because property prices can always go up. Wow, another US businessman buys a football club. Why Gillingham though? What Gillingham going to do? I do not understand the obsession by US wealthy US millionaires and billionaires in purchasing English football clubs and Scottish football clubs as well, because also their tentacles have reached Scottish football. Because it does concern me with the direction that the game is going. Personally, yeah, they're not, are they? Because it's also indoor sport facilities that are getting sold off or privatised or whatever, and it's not necessarily the development, is there? We'll see if that's the reason because half the Premier League now has American investment of some kind or another, and Bournemouth is looking likely to be a full takeover as well. Um, so half the Premier League and a fair chunk of the Football League from Championship down to League Two, and even now in the non-league with Wrexham have American money in it. So all the professional tiers of the game in England has American money in it. And I'm trying to figure out the direction this is taking, whether it's actually going to be a long term good for the game or whether there's going to be some negative consequences. The Golden, well, I think he's a part owner of the Golden Knights, so he doesn't fully own the Golden Knights. He's a part owner of that organisation. Now, whether he ends up selling his share in the Vegas Golden Knights and then putting that investment into Bournemouth is another thing. But he's already 77 years old. So how long he stays over at Bournemouth is going to be interesting, and what happens with that club. There needs to be massive stadium development because the stadium is the smallest in the Premier League by a long way, and they need to stabilise back in the league again and make a push going up the table. But it's interesting. Walsall, very historical club. Done a video on them. Go back to the Football Alliance Football League rivalry days. A very historical club, one of the earliest, oldest clubs on a professional level in this country. Obviously, the lack of success is a frustrating thing, but without clubs like Walsall, we don't have the current football league we have today. Um, and again, very interesting. Yes, they bought the stadium as well, which is very, very important. Um, and it's going to be interesting to see the direction Walsall takes. But the fact that so much of our sporting infrastructure has been bought by Americans is interesting, because how would Americans feel about Brits or Europeans coming up over to the US and Canada and buying into their NHL, NBA, NFL, MLS, Major League Baseball franchises? How would Americans feel? That's an interesting one. How would Americans feel if Europeans started buying into their North American sports franchises? I know David Beckham's done it with the MLS, but that's from the ground up with Inter Miami. He basically comes in with that team. But how would Americans feel if multiple ownership groups come in and buy stakes or outright buy teams in their leagues? It'd be very interesting how they would feel about that. I don't think they would like it. I don't think they'll like it. And a lot of, but there you go. You can't picture it. But how would you feel? How that feeling translates itself? That's the interesting thing. How would American fans feel about their teams being purchased by a British or European or Asian or Australian owner? How would American fans feel if their NHL, NBA, Major League Baseball, MLS, and NFL teams were purchased by an overseas investor? Um, I've noticed Americans making a big fuss about Argentina having an MLS player win the World Cup. There was an MLS player, a younger player in the Argentina squad who was an MLS player. Yes, he got game time as well. I think he's the first MLS player to win a World Cup. He's not the first MLS player to make it to the latter knockout stages of a World Cup. That's been done before. But that's normally of a European team. It's probably an older player who's finishing out their career in the MLS. This is a guy who's playing his prime football at the MLS right now. Um, I think it's something you want to big up. So you've got a World Cup winner who plays in our league. I think that's a very important thing, considering that the next World Cup is in the US, Canada, and Mexico. That's a very important thing. Former Tampa Bay Lightning chief commercial officer Jim Frivola. Great question. Very hard to say. Just I can't really have anything to compare it to. How far would fans traveling to watch their team? 40 minutes, an hour? Interesting. But I do want to. How would American fans? Well, that's a very interesting question to be put forward, because American owners are buying into football, rugby union. I think there's a growing interest in rugby league as well, because the Manly Sea Eagles, uh, Penn family spend a lot of their time in the US. There's a lot of US investment in that rugby league side. So, how would American fans feel if their professional sports teams and leagues, apart from David Beckham notwithstanding, because obviously he's linked with the MLS as a player, how would American fans feel about their teams being bought or part funded by, let's say, British and Australian and Asian investment? Um, let just think on that. It's something worth considering down the line, absolutely down the line, because they're coming into our backyard, and we're not always happy with that investment. We as fans over here in a variety of sports aren't necessarily comfortable with the Americanization, and a lot of these Americanizers don't fully get the sport and culture at all. Another reason why they're very interested in tapping into the football clubs and the rugby clubs is because of the popularity of these sports being consumed by the American fan base when they're watching the European leagues. That's another reason why I think they're interested in buying in. But how would American fans feel about a European owner or an Asian owner or an Australian owner coming in and buying a major league team of any sport? That would be interesting. So I want to see that feedback. I want to see what people feel about that, and how they would respond, because I don't think it's been done. B, there's been a lot of resistance early on, especially in the NHL, to the European players coming in the 70s and the 80s from a lot of people. I don't know how the NBA fans felt about the European players coming over and playing, and they're very, very good, by the way. And obviously, baseball, those Asian and Latin American players coming in, and initially, were they resisted against? It's very interesting. Very interesting. Anyway, I'm going to call that a live stream because I've got to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning my time, and I start an hour earlier at work tomorrow, so that's going to be fun. Not. And I'm still not 100%. So I'm going to call it a night from me. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. And I'll have some more content for you very, very, very soon. Ugh.